We're at the midpoint of our 1950s of the NFL Championship Series we're running, and it's time for change in the National Football League as two different teams come in this decade, and we have it all coming up with Warren Rogan from the Sports Forgotten Heroes as he joins us to tell us about the 1956 season and the New York Giants coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And welcome to another edition of our championship series before the Super Bowls. And we are having a great time doing this. And we're way up in the 1950s right now, going to 1956 and the New York Giants. And we have a New York Giants historian, a repeat guest here on the Pig Pen. We have Warren Rogan. And Warren, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, Darren, thanks for having me. Glad to be back. Always love talking football with you. And, you know, for me, what's better than talking New York Giants football? Even though it's torture to watch them these days.
Yeah, that's the beauty of history. You go back and pick any era in history that you want to talk about and have a great podcast on it. So we're glad to have you on here. And we know that you love your Giants and you love this era of Giants because we know you've done quite a bit on having some guests and talk before when we were doing our Jersey series back in 2021. Can you believe it's been that long? 4 years ago since we've done that. But yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on with your projects these days in football history?
Sure. My podcast, Sports Forgotten Heroes, I try to follow the seasons. So right now, I'm mostly into baseball, but during the football season, it's obviously a lot of football. And this past year, I did some really cool football shows. Giant-wise, Mel Hine was a great subject, as was Frank Gifford. And what I liked about the Frank Gifford podcast was that I believe that most people, when they hear of Frank Gifford, they think of the television analyst, the play-by-play guy, the guy that was synonymous with Monday Night Football. And of course, his marriage to, the famous television host, Kathy. Yeah. But I don't think a lot of people think of Gifford in terms of a football player. And the dude was great. I mean, he was a great football player at USC, Southern Cal, where he wound up in the College Football Hall of Fame. And he was a great Hall of Fame player for the New York Giants. You know, he played in the defensive backfield. He played halfback or, a running back. And he was a receiver as well. And perhaps that's where he made some of his greatest contributions to the Giants, including in 1956, as a receiver. And the other big project that I have going on, and you were a really nice inspiration, is I wrote my first book. The name of the book is
congrats on that.
All-Stars. Yeah, thanks, man. The name of the book is College All-Stars versus NFL Champions. And it's a really, I think, a really cool concept. It's talks about a series of football games, and there's not a lot written about this, that took place from 1934 through 1976. We get into these barroom discussions, right? Yeah, trivia. Do you think that a team a college team can beat an NFL team? And the answer is usually 99.9% of the time, people say there's just no way. Because if you think about it, the best college football teams have, just a handful of guys who are ever going to make it to the pros, and they might not even be starters, some of them. Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, Texas. You might get 4 or 5 guys a year get drafted and go to the pros. But the rest of them, the worst professional football players, the guys, number 53 on the roster of an NFL team, is usually number 1, 2, or 3 on a college football team. But from 1934 until 1976, every year, every summer, a team of all-stars of college football players who graduated, right? They were seniors, they no longer have college eligibility, gathered for a few weeks of practice up in Chicago. And to start the exhibition season, they would take on the defending NFL champion. And the NFL team didn't want to lose this game. They flat out didn't want to lose this game. In the beginning of the series, it was more about giving the NFL coverage, right? Making the NFL a popular game. College football was the game back in the 30s, especially in the early 30s. Most people didn't think of the NFL as a marquee league back then because they weren't in the marquee markets, and they were having trouble gaining traction. So this was also some sort of a PR stunt by Arch Ward to help popularize the NFL game. And at that time, the Bears and the Packers and the Giants were really good teams. But you had teams like in Akron, Pottsville, all these different places. But as time went on, the NFL got better and better and better. And believe it or not, the college teams won this game almost 25% of the time. They won 9 of the 42 games played. And that's nearly 25%. The last one was the most shocking of all, 1963. So they played the defending NFL champion, and then when it became the Super Bowl champion, they played the defending Super Bowl champion. But the last time the college team won was in 1963 when they defeated Vince Lombardi and the Green Bay Packers. And Lombardi was none too pleased. So I wrote a book about it. It's fun. It covers a lot more than just the games. It talks about, the risk that some of these players took by playing in a game without having signed their contract yet with an NFL team. So they risked their NFL career. Talks about how the games evolved over the course of time, how the league, the NFL evolved, how some of college football evolved, the first ever television broadcast of a game. And it talks about some of the NFL stars or college stars, that actually appeared in the game who you might not think about. Guys like Gerald Ford, Byron Whizzer White, Alex Karras from those Detroit Lion teams that you're talking about on your podcast. Alex Karras was a famous television star too, right? Burgess Owen. So there are a bunch of different guys I talk about, and it was always been a goal of mine to write a book. Like I said, you gave me some inspiration. I went out, I spent the time to write the book, and I'm happy to say it's being published, and it not coming out for a while. That's the downer. It won't be out till June of 2026, but I'm really excited about it. And I can't wait for it to hit the stands.
Yeah, well, that's awesome news, and I'm glad that were able to get a publisher too. And don't worry, that year will go by really quick. And 13 months from now, you'll be looking back and say you won't even remember this conversation. It'll be all happiness and everything. So when you get that first copy in your hands, you'll love it. And when you
Yeah,
do, let us know, and we'll have you on and talk more about this. This game, because it's a lot of great stars, like you said, and
yeah,
even some college Hall of Famers besides NFL Hall of Famers. Lots of
yeah,
college Hall of Famers too, and
yeah,
probably almost all the college Hall of Famers that we
yeah,
know of,
yeah,
at
yeah.
least since 1934. But yeah, some great games. I remember a few of them because my Steelers were in it, the last
They were.
couple,
They were.
and it wasn't like and we have to remember these games weren't like they didn't throw like the third string in. They wanted to win. Yeah, Bradshaw and Jack Lambert, they were playing in that game, the whole game, just like they would have week one in the NFL. So yeah,
Absolutely.
great
Oh, yeah.
game.
They absolutely did. Yep.
We'll never see that again. So
No, no, no.
yeah, but tonight we're going to go back a little, in between this, while this college all-star game is going on, right smack in the middle of the 1956 season. So some of these guys that played in that game, maybe we're talking about some of them tonight here in this
Yeah.
56 season and your Giants. So what can you tell us about the 56 season in the NFL?
Well, the Giants did win the NFL championship that year. They beat the Chicago Bears 47-7 in the NFL championship game. And like it was in earlier between the two teams back in the 30s, this was also a sneakers game. In 1934, the Giants beat the Chicago Bears 30-13, and it was in the field wasn't in good condition, snow and all, and the Giants played in sneakers, and that gave them better traction on the ice than the cleats did. With cleats, you're because you're above the ice, you have no grip, you're sliding. And the Giants were able to they thought about it somehow. I forget the story, but they wore sneakers. They did the same thing again in 56, and they beat the Bears 47-7. Now, interestingly, they also played the Bears during the regular season, and they played to a 17-17 tie. The Giants were a pretty good team back in the 50s. They were always in contention, but they never made it to the championship game. And 56 was a big deal for the Giants because they won the NFL championship in 25, 34, and 38. And like I said, they were always a contender, but they never seemed to be able to get over the top. The Bears were better. The Packers were better. So while they won in 25, they lost in 33, they lost in 35, they lost in 39, they lost in 44, they lost in 46. Finally, they put it all together and they won in 1956. And they had a really good team. They went 8-3-1 during the regular season, and they had some studs on that team. They had 5 guys on that team in 1956 who wound up in the Hall of Fame. You had Frank Gifford, you had Sam Huff, you had Roosevelt Brown, you had Emlyn Tunnell, and you had Andy Robustelli.
Hmm.
The interesting thing to me, and I don't, the quarterback that everybody associates with the Giants back then was Charlie Connerly. The guy was he was a stud, and Connerly was in the Pro Bowl, or was named was a Pro Bowl player. But Don Heinrich was the starting quarterback. So I don't
Hmm.
actually understand the mechanics there because, like I said, the Giants regular season, they were 8-3-1. Heinrich's quarterback record that year was 8 wins, 3 losses, and 1 tie. Charlie Connerly was never the quarterback of record, but he played
Hmm.
quarterback more often than Heinrich. As I look at it right here, Heinrich was 37 of 88 for 369 yards and 5 touchdowns. Connerly didn't start a single game. Heinrich started all 12 games. So if you start the game, you are the quarterback of record. Heinrich,
Right.
90 completions in 174 attempts, threw for 1,143 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. So he was the guy that was getting the stats, and he was almost 10 years older than Heinrich. He was 35. Heinrich was 26. So that's one of those things that I don't really understand. But here's another interesting thing about the 56 season. That was the first year that the Giants played in Yankee Stadium. Up until that point, the New York Giants played in the Polo Grounds. And,
Hmm.
people watching or listening, I don't know if they really recognize how close the Polo Grounds were to Yankee Stadium. You could literally walk from one stadium to the other. They were right across the bridge,
Hmm.
right across the river from each other. So the Giants played in the Polo Grounds, and they finally moved over to Yankee Stadium because the New York Yankees were such perennial World Series participants. The NFL had to make an exception to the Giants' schedule because you always thought that the Yankees would be in the World Series come October. So the Giants' first 3 games of the 56 season were all on the road. And the Yankees, right before the Giants got into the stadium in 56, won the World Series with Don Larson pitching the perfect game. So they went from the perfect game of Don Larson to the Giants finally getting into Yankee Stadium. And the Giants opened the 56 season beating the 49ers out in San Francisco 38-21. Then they lost their second game to the Chicago Cardinals, who we now know are the Arizona Cardinals. They lost that game 35-27. And then the Giants started to put together a win streak. They beat the Cleveland Browns in their final away game. The third straight game to open the season was an away game. They beat the Browns 21-9, and they opened up the regular season, their first ever game at Yankee Stadium against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And they beat the Steelers 38-10. Then Philadelphia came to town. They beat the Eagles 20-3. And the Giants went to Pittsburgh. Sorry, they beat the Steelers again, this time 17-14.
That's all right. I think everybody beat the Steelers.
Yeah, yeah. That's really, going back to what we were talking about before with the college all-star game. The Steelers never played in it until they got to the Super Bowl. It's crazy. They just they were not the team that they've been the last half a century. But then they beat the Cardinals at home 23-10. Then they went to DC, lost to the then Redskins. But the Giants finished the season 8-3-1. And like I said, they were a heck of a team. Um, their defense had Rosie Greer on it, Dick Nolan, Jim Payton, Emlyn Tunnel. But they were really a marquee team. And like I said, they had 5 Hall of Famers on it. But here's another little interesting tidbit. about the 56 Giants. Their coach was Jim Lee Howell. Their defensive coordinator was a guy by the name of Tom Landry. Their offensive coordinator was a guy by the name of Vince Lombardi. So the Giants had on their staff perhaps two of the greatest coaches of all time in Lombardi and Landry. Somehow they let them get away. And obviously both went on to, these historic Hall of Fame careers. And after they left is when the Giants really started to tank.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fascinating aspect. We've talked about that before on not on this series, but some other program. We talked about Landry and Lombardi being the coordinators, and Jim Lee Howe. Most people have never heard of Jim Lee Howe, and but when you have two assistant coaches like that, you can you don't have to use your brain power as much because you got those guys really working for you. But I
Yeah.
want to ask a question about this quarterback situation, though.
Yes.
Okay, between Connerly and the
Don
other
Heinrich.
gentleman,
Don Heinrich.
Heineke. Okay, he now could this be maybe a playbook out of the Rams from a few years earlier when they were using Waterfield and Van Brocklin as depending on the situations or every other series
Well,
or
I'm not sure because I thought about that, and the Heinrich started every game. So it was more than just let's alternate series. And Don Heinrich started every game because the quarterback of record is the quarterback, at least the way I understand it, is the quarterback who starts the game. So so the Giants went 8-3-1 during the regular season, and Heinrich was 8-3-1. Connerly did not have a win, a loss, or a tie. And in the playoffs, ironically, again, Don Heinrich started the game. He was 3 of 6 for 21 yards. He is the quarterback of record. He is the quarterback who got the win. Charlie Connerly was 7 of 10 for 195 yards and 2 touchdown passes. Heinrich only, like I said, was 3 of 6 for 50 yards. So I'm not sure, why that was. But here's another cool little tidbit about that season. You know how the sidelines, the coaches talk to the players in their helmets, right?
right.
That was really the first time that happened was a 56 season. It was the Giants when a coach could connect to the quarterback through a radio. The quarterback had a receiver in the helmet so he could hear the plays that the coach was calling in. So the Giants were doing this, and a couple of teams are doing it. But that third game of the season, the one on the road in Cleveland, the Giants used the radio to intercept the Browns' calls. So Landry knew what the plays were and called the defense because he knew what the plays were. The Browns had a fit. They went to the commissioner of the league at the time, Burt Bell, and he said, that's it. And Bell outlawed the devices after that. So that happened during the 56 season as well. So Landry was intercepting the Browns plays. The Giants, like I said, they robbed 21-9.
Yeah, let's see. But I just going back to our quarterback situation. I just went back and looked at the 51 Rams. Now, Van Brocklin started 2 of the 12 games. Waterfield started 10. Waterfield was 7-3 quarterback record. Van Brocklin was 1-1. So your theory is right. So the starting quarterback on there. But I bet you it's a similar situation because Waterfield started the majority of the games for the Rams, And I think if I remember correctly, one of the strategies were they would have Waterfield would throw passes that he did. Of course, they had the great running backs. They had two uh, waves of running backs to bring in, the elephant and I forget what they called the other ones, but the speedy guys,
Yeah.
and they just pounded people. But that Waterfield could a good passer too. And then Van Brocklin coming in with his passing game was a whole different thing. It just threw defenses so off kilter. I wonder if maybe that's some of the Giants' strategy they were
I'm
using.
sure. I'm sure it was. It was probably had something to do with getting, just getting the team going and all. It's, maybe it was give Heinrich. He was 26. Give him, I don't know, give him some experience. I don't know. Then you get the Grizzly veteran in there, Charlie Connerly, and he would uh he was a heck of a quarterback. I wanted to go back for a second though to Landry and Lombardi because instead of keeping them, the Giants let both of them go and they brought in this guy who was the coach of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the CFL. They let Lombardi go. They bring in this guy, Ali Sherman, and he becomes the OC of the Giants in '59. And he just couldn't. After that, Jim Lee Howell left, and they gave the job to Ali Sherman because he had such experience in the CFL, and really didn't do that great a job with the Giants. So it was pretty pretty interesting there how the
Yeah.
Giants.
So Gifford was the main running back for the Giants. He the main
Yeah,
weapon on the
so
ground.
yeah, Gifford he led the team in rushing. He had 819 yards rushing and receiving. He led the team in receiving as well with 603 yards. So they also had Alex Webster in the backfield. He ran for 694 yards, and Mel Triplett ran for 515. So the Giants had three decent running backs. Well, Gifford was more than decent, but you got to remember back then they only played 12 games. So if you got 1,000 yards rushing back then, that was a heck of a lot better than, much more meaning. I won't say better, but to get 1,000 yards back in the 50s during a 12-game season was a lot more difficult than it is to get 1,000 yards in a 17-game season today. But yeah, Gifford led the team in receiving as well. He had 603 yards receiving. Kyle Rote was number 2 with 405 yards. So, they had, Gifford ran for 5 touchdowns. Webster ran for 7 touchdowns. Triplett ran for 5. Gifford caught passes, 4 passes for touchdowns. Kyle Rote caught 4 passes for touchdowns. Guy by the name of Ken McAfee also caught 4 passes for touchdowns. They had a pretty balanced attack. And this is also before 56 was before Gifford got destroyed by I can't think of his name. Chuck
Concrete
Bednarik.
Charlie.
Yeah. This is before he got destroyed by Bednarik from the Eagles.
Yeah, yeah. Amazing. Okay, so defensive side, you mentioned some legendary names there. You're talking about Sam Huff and Rosie Greer and some of the others. So tell us how
Yeah, they
that
also had
defense played for Landry.
Rosie Brown, Dick Nolan. They had some. As I look at it here, Dick Nolan intercepted 2 passes. Tunnel was really good. He intercepted 6 passes that year. Sam Huff, who also went on, he had a great career with Washington as well. He had 3 interceptions as the middle linebacker. The Giants, it's a really, it's such an interesting thing to me. When I think of the New York Giants over the course of history, I always think of a team that was just, their championship teams always had great linebackers. And their teams these days, the Giants, for whatever reason, for years, don't value the linebacker the way they used to. And in a way, I also think sort of like the running back, the position of linebacker, whether you play 4 linebackers or 3 linebackers, has been minimized because of how teams stack the defensive front, and you have to have great defensive backs to play in the game today. You know, the aerial attack of the game today is so much more lethal than it was back then. And you know, you think of the Giants through the years, you know, you had Sam Huff and those teams in the 80s, you know, Harry Carson and Carl Banks and, you know, obviously Lawrence Taylor. And then, you know, even into the 90s with Gary Reasons and that crew. They've always had great, their championship teams always had great linebackers, and they don't have that kind of linebacking today. I mean, you had Bill Svoboda back then and Sam Huff back then. Their linebackers were just, they were great linebackers for the Giants back in that day. And those guys quarterback the defense. And their defense isn't that way. Yeah, their defense isn't that way anymore. Huff was the rookie of the year in '56. He came out of West Virginia, and you know, he started 10 of the 12 games, 3 interceptions. You know, recovered 2 fumbles. They had Jim Catvage, who came to them out of Dayton that year, and you know, he was pretty darn good. Their kicker Don Chandler. They acquired Robustelli from the Rams, Dick Modzelewski from the Steelers. You know, they were and they already had Rosie Greer, and they had Evelyn Tunnel and Dick Nolan and Jim Payton. They were a solid team. They were a solid team. They weren't a dominant team like we see the teams of today in the NFL, but they were a solid team. They played a great team game. Like I said, they weren't known as a team for one star. They had many good players and a couple of great players. Like I said, Gifford wound up in the Hall, Huff wound up in the Hall, Brown wound up in the Hall, Tunnel wound up in the Hall, and Robustelli also wound up in the Hall.
Yeah, last year we did a whole series on the Giants' 100th anniversary season. So we went through a lot of their players in some of the seasons, and Tunnel I was not that familiar with till I started studying him and watching some old videos. This guy was freaking amazing. I mean,
Yeah,
not only, I mean, when he got the ball in his hands on an interception, but a lot of kick returns, this guy was electric. I mean, he would be like Desmond Howard of our era. This guy
yeah.
is like
He's
amazing.
probably a guy I should do a show about on Sports Forgotten Heroes, you know? And like I said, it was a team game for them, Darren. You know, they weren't expected. They were supposed to be better than the average team. Their expected record, they were predicted to go 8-4. And like I said, they weren't a dominant team. They were just a really good team. They were 5th in the league in scoring. They were fourth in the league in points against. So they didn't really dominate any one side of the ball. They were just really good on both sides of the ball. And yeah, they were 56. They caught a couple of teams sleeping. They went 8-3-1, so they were only expected to win 8 games, and that's exactly what they did. But you know, I would say the NFL really didn't have much of a dominant elite team that year. The Giants were 8-3-1. The Cardinals finished second in the East at 7-5. Out west, the Bears, they snuck in by percentage points. They went 9-2-1. The Lions, who were a really good, great football team in the 50s, they were 9-3. So because the Bears tied the Giants and didn't lose to the Giants, the Bears had a better winning percentage of 8-18 at 9-2-1, as opposed to the Lions, who went 9-3, and you know that was a 750 winning percentage. And just take a look, the Bears beat the Lions 42-10, and the Lions beat them 38-21. So or the Lions beat the Bears. I'm sorry. The Lions beat the Bears 42-10 in Detroit. And the last game of the season was the big deal. If the Lions win that game, they would have gone 10-1-1 and played the Giants. But the Bears at home at Soldier Field beat the Lions 38-21 to earn the right to play the Giants in the NFL championship game. And they lost 47-7.
Yeah. And this is kind of an odd year, too, 56, from the standpoint, if you look back all the way back to the 1950 season, the teams that are playing, you know, a lot of Detroit, a lot of Cleveland playing each other, the Rams. And this is a year where none of those three teams are in the championship, even though in 57, again, you have the Lions and the Browns playing again for a championship. And I think they met 3 or 4 times during that decade. So it's amazing.
You know, the Browns, I'm not a Browns fan, but I respect the heck out of what that team did in the 40s and 50s. And I'm actually really happy to see that the NFL is now counting the statistics from the All-America Football Conference, which played in 46, 47, 48, and 49. And there were some pretty weak teams in there, but you still had a really good San Francisco 49er team. You had a team called the New York Yankees in the AAFC, and they were really good too. And the Browns won all 4 of those championships. And people were saying it was the AAFC. It didn't mean anything because look who they were beating. They weren't beating NFL teams. Well, what happened when the Browns got to the NFL? They won the championship in 50, right? The Browns probably from 46 through the mid 1950s might have been one of the most 2 or 3 dominant teams in the history of the NFL. They were that good. Otto Graham played in 10 straight NFL championship games. Nobody else has done that. That's crazy.
Yeah.
He played in
10 straight championship games. They had the 4 AFCs.
Yes. With 4 and then the 5 in the NFL.
Right.
But they were that good a team. It didn't matter that they were playing in the AAFC. They were that good, and they came and they proved it. And one of the fun stories I like is that when they got into the NFL and the first game, they beat the Eagles, I think it was, and The Eagles, they played that fake game where they kept throwing the ball, so that's why they beat us. Then the next time they played the Eagles, they threw the ball once and whipped them good with just running. But I mean, the Browns won the NFL championship in 50. They played for the championship in 52 and 53 and 54. They won it again in 55, in 56, they won it again in 54 and 55. They were just this machine. Paul Brown was one heck of a coach, and he put together one heck of a team. And by the way, in the 1957 College All-Star game, the defending NFL champion New York Giants beat the College All-Stars 22-12. Just wanting.
That was my next question. I was going to ask you since we were talking Giants tonight in this 56th season, and that is a great way to sum up the season. A great job by you to tell us about your Giants and the College All-Star games here and wrap it up with a Giants victory in that game. So we're looking forward to your book next year, and we really appreciate you coming on here and sharing this great piece of NFL history and Giants history.
Well, I hope I did them justice. I'm sure there's a lot more little facts and figures everybody could talk about, but I do want to say, they won it in 56 and they made it back, but they lost it in 58. They lost it in 59. They lost it in 61 and 62 and 63. They didn't win again until Phil Simms and the 86 Giants. So the Giants have a championship pedigree, but it comes and it goes.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Warren, and we will talk to you again real soon.
You got it. Anytime, Darren.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.